Cigarette smoke curled upward in the dimly lit private training room somewhere in San Diego. The year was 1968, late in the evening, and the air hung thick with the smell of sweat, worn leather, and a palpable tension you could almost taste. Bruce Lee positioned himself near the middle of the mat, his black shirt pressed against his lean body. He'd been observing a crew of military guys running through basic defense drills. Someone had called in a favor to bring him here unofficial business, helping out a buddy who worked with special ops trainees. The whole thing was meant to be low-key, just a demonstration. An exchange between people who got violence in ways regular folks never could, but somebody in that room had different plans. Staff Sergeant Ray Dalton leaned against the back wall with his arms folded tight, methodically working his jaw around a piece of gum. The guy stood 6'2" and weighed 220 pounds of solid, compact muscle carved from years of underwater demolition work, brutal training cycles, and real combat tours. His forearms looked thick as ship cables. And his eyes? They never wandered from Bruce Lee. To Dalton, the guy on the mat was just a novelty. An actor, a performer, somebody who showed movie stars how to fake looking tough. Sure, he'd heard the rumors floating around the base, whispers about this Chinese guy being something extraordinary, about him beating several challengers behind closed doors, about his speed being unlike anything anyone had witnessed. But Dalton didn't buy into legends. He trusted results. And where he came from, results meant broken bones and bodies that didn't get back up. The demonstration rolled on. Bruce guided one of the younger guys through a drill, fine-tuning his footing, adjusting where his elbow sat, breaking down how a stop hit actually worked. His tone stayed even, almost like he was teaching a college class. Every movement from his hands was surgical, nothing wasted, and Dalton kept watching, kept waiting. When everyone broke for water, he pushed himself off that wall and headed straight for the mat. The room got quieter. A few guys traded looks, sensing the shift happening. Bruce clocked him coming but didn't give anything away. He just stood there, towel slung over one shoulder, breathing steady. "So you're the guy?" Dalton said, stopping a few feet out. His voice carried that flat certainty of someone who'd never been given a reason to second-guess himself. Bruce cocked his head slightly. "I'm a guy." A couple nervous laughs popped up from the trainees. Dalton's face stayed stone. "I've heard plenty about you," Dalton went on. "Heard you're fast. Heard you put down a few karate guys who should have known better." He let the silence hang there. "But I'm curious about something." Bruce waited. "I'm curious what happens when you step up against a real man, somebody who's actually been in the shit, not some tournament fighter, not some actor worried about protecting his pretty face." Dalton moved half a step closer. "Somebody who doesn't give a damn about rules." Complete stillness settled over the room. Bruce's face gave nothing. His body stayed loose, weight centered. To anyone paying real attention, nothing seemed different except his eyes. They'd locked onto Dalton with total focus. "You're asking me to fight you," Bruce said softly. Dalton shrugged. "I'm asking you to prove you're not what I think you are. And what do you think I am? A fraud." The word hit like a slap across the face. Several trainees shifted on their feet. The officer who'd set this whole thing up took a step forward, ready to shut it down. But Bruce lifted a hand slightly, stopping him. "If I'm a fraud," Bruce said slowly, "then you've got nothing to worry about." Dalton smiled for the first time, cold, predatory. "Then let's find out." What happened next would become one of the most closely protected stories among the guys who saw it, not because of the violence, though there'd be plenty, but because of what it showed about confrontation itself. And about a man who understood combat in ways that went beyond size, beyond strength, beyond military training. Within 90 seconds, Ray Dalton's entire understanding of fighting would be permanently rewritten. The officer in charge, a lieutenant commander named Harmon, stepped up with his palms raised. "Gentlemen, this isn't—" "It's fine," Bruce cut him off. His voice wasn't aggressive or defensive. It sounded like a man accepting an invitation to grab dinner. Not an invitation to violence. Let him have what he wants. Dalton was already peeling off his shirt, revealing a torso sculpted from years of punishing work. Scars traced his ribs and shoulders, souvenirs from missions he'd never discuss in public. He rolled his neck, joints popping audibly, and walked toward the center of the mat. Bruce handed off his towel to one of the trainees without looking. He didn't stretch, didn't drop into any fighting stance, just walked out to meet Dalton, stopping roughly 8 feet away. The guys in the room formed a loose half-circle around them. Nobody talked. The only sounds were the ventilation system humming and distant noise from somewhere else on base. Dalton settled into a boxer's posture, weight balanced, hands up, chin down. It was a stance refined through endless hours of combat training and actual field use. He started circling slowly left, testing the space between them, hunting for an opening. Bruce stood nearly square, hands hanging low, feet positioned in a way that looked almost casual unless you knew what to look for. But those who understood fighting saw something else, a subtle readiness, like a spring coiled tight but hiding its tension. "Whenever you're ready, movie star," Dalton said. Bruce didn't answer, just watched. Dalton feinted with his left shoulder, a probing motion meant to trigger a reaction. Bruce didn't budge. Dalton feinted again, harder this time. Still nothing. A flash of frustration crossed Dalton's face. He was used to opponents who gave themselves away, who flinched at quick movements, who showed their patterns within the first few seconds. This guy gave him absolutely nothing to read. The SEAL decided to force things. He threw a straight right hand, not full power but a ranging shot designed to set distance and draw a response. It was the kind of punch that had dropped bigger men, delivered with the mechanical precision of someone who'd used his fists professionally. Bruce moved. What happened next unfolded so fast that several witnesses would struggle later to describe it accurately. Bruce's upper body shifted maybe 3 inches to the left, not a dramatic slip. Just enough to let Dalton's fist slide harmlessly past his cheek. At the same instant, his right hand shot forward in a straight vertical punch traveling less than 12 inches. The impact caught Dalton dead center on the sternum. The SEAL's forward drive stopped like he'd hit an invisible wall. His eyes went wide. All the air left his lungs in one explosive grunt. He stumbled backward 2 steps, hands dropping instinctively to guard his midsection. Bruce hadn't moved from his spot. His hand was already back at his side, relaxed. The whole exchange had lasted less than a second. Dalton blinked, trying to make sense of what just went down. He'd been hit before, hit hard by guys who knew how to generate serious power. But this was different. The punch hadn't looked powerful. There'd been no wind-up, no rotation he could see, no telegraph at all. Yet the impact had sent a shockwave through his entire body, like someone had swung a baseball bat straight into his chest. "What the hell?" Dalton muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He straightened up, forcing his breathing back under control. The first flicker of doubt showed in his eyes, though he quickly buried it. He was a Navy SEAL. He'd survived Hell Week. He'd operated in conditions that would shatter most people. He wasn't about to be intimidated by one lucky shot from a guy who weighed 50 pounds less than him. Dalton reset his stance and moved in again, more carefully this time. He threw a jab, then another, testing Bruce's reactions. Both punches missed by impossibly tiny margins, Bruce's head moving just enough to avoid contact, nothing more. Then Dalton committed to a combination. Jab, cross, left hook, 3 strikes thrown with real intent, each one capable of ending the fight. Bruce slipped the jab, parried the cross with his left hand, sending it past his shoulder. And the hook? The hook never landed because as Dalton's right hand was still coming back from the parried cross, Bruce stepped inside his guard and delivered a palm strike to the underside of his jaw. The SEAL's head snapped back. His knees buckled. For a moment he seemed frozen in time, his body unsure whether to collapse or stay upright. Bruce could have finished it right there. Everyone in the room knew it. Instead, he stepped back to his original position and waited. Dalton shook his head, trying to clear the static suddenly filling his brain. He tasted copper. His vision had gone white at the edges for a moment. When it cleared, he saw Bruce standing exactly where he'd been before, hands still low, expression unchanged. Something shifted behind Dalton's eyes. The professional detachment, the controlled aggression of a trained operator, it started to crack. What emerged underneath was older, more primitive. The look of a man whose identity was being threatened, whose understanding of himself was being challenged in ways he couldn't put into words. He stopped thinking about technique, stopped thinking about strategy. He just wanted to hurt the man in front of him. Dalton charged. The charge was explosive, 220 pounds of muscle and rage, launching forward with the kind of total commitment that left no room for backing out. Dalton's plan was clear. Close the gap, neutralize the speed advantage, turn this into the kind of grinding, suffocating brawl where his size and strength would become the deciding factors. Against most opponents, it was a solid strategy. It would have worked. Bruce didn't retreat, didn't circle away. He moved forward. The two men met in the middle of the mat, but what should have been a collision became something else entirely. At the last possible instant, Bruce angled his body maybe 15 degrees to the right, letting Dalton's momentum carry him slightly past. At the same time, his lead leg swept low, hooking behind Dalton's front ankle. The SEAL's own forward drive became his enemy. His base vanished. He pitched forward, arms windmilling, and slammed into the mat hard on his shoulder and hip. Bruce was already positioned above him. Before Dalton could process his new orientation, a fist stopped 1 inch from his throat. Not a punch, a placement, a demonstration of what could have happened. The room held its breath. Bruce pulled his hand back and stepped away, offering no help, no commentary. He simply waited. Dalton pushed himself up, his face flushed with a mix of exertion and something darker. A thin line of blood had appeared at the corner of his mouth from the earlier palm strike. He wiped it with the back of his hand and stared at the red smear for a moment, like he couldn't quite believe it came from him. "Lucky," he said, though the word carried no weight. Bruce stayed silent. Dalton circled more carefully now, breathing heavier, movements less smooth. The arrogance that had carried him into this fight was eroding, replaced by something more desperate. He was watching his own mythology collapse in real time. He threw a low-kick technique borrowed from Muay Thai coaches who sometimes worked with special ops units, aimed at Bruce's lead thigh, designed to damage the mobility that made him so hard to hit. Bruce checked the kick with his shin, absorbing it without any visible reaction. But as Dalton's leg was still pulling back, Bruce's rear leg whipped forward in a side kick that covered the distance faster than the eye could comfortably follow. The heel of Bruce's foot connected with Dalton's hip just below the iliac crest. The effect was immediate and brutal. Dalton's entire left side seemed to shut down. He stumbled sideways, his leg giving out beneath him, and barely stayed upright by grabbing the shoulder of a trainee who'd been standing too close. A gasp rippled through the observers. The trainee Dalton had grabbed looked terrified, unsure whether to support the injured man or get clear. Dalton shoved himself off the trainee and turned back toward Bruce. He was limping now, his left leg compromised, his options shrinking with every second. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments, was screaming at him to stop, to acknowledge he was outmatched, to preserve what dignity he had left. But Ray Dalton had built his entire identity on being the most dangerous guy in any room he walked into. That identity was now bleeding out on the mat of a private training facility, and he couldn't accept it. "That all you got?" he managed, though his voice was strained. Bruce tilted his head slightly, and for the first time, something like expression crossed his face. It wasn't anger, wasn't satisfaction. It was closer to disappointment. The look of a teacher watching a student refuse to learn an obvious lesson. "You're hurt," Bruce said quietly. "This doesn't need to continue. I'll decide when it's over." Bruce nodded slowly. "Then you've decided." Dalton lunged again, this time reaching for a clinch, hoping to use his remaining strength to tie Bruce up, drag him into the kind of grinding exchange where technique mattered less than raw physicality. His hands found nothing but air. Bruce had sidestepped with a movement so economical it barely qualified as motion. As Dalton's momentum carried him past, Bruce's elbow rose in a short, tight arc and connected with the SEAL's temple. The sound was sharp, a crack that made several observers flinch. Dalton dropped to one knee. His eyes had gone glassy, unfocused. His hands reached toward the mat, seeking stability his nervous system could no longer provide. Bruce stood over him, perfectly still. "Enough," Lieutenant Commander Harmon said, stepping forward. His voice carried the weight of rank, but also something else. Relief. "That's enough." But Dalton wasn't finished. With a grunt of pure determination, he pushed himself back to his feet. He swayed visibly, guard non-existent. body operating on nothing but willpower and wounded pride. He threw a right hand slow, telegraphed, desperate. What Bruce did next would be discussed in whispered conversations for years afterward. He didn't counter, didn't evade. He caught Dalton's wrist mid-flight, redirected the punch past his own shoulder, and in the same fluid motion stepped behind the seal and applied pressure to a point just below his ear. Dalton's body went rigid for a single heartbeat. Then he collapsed. The silence that followed was absolute. Dalton lay motionless on the mat, chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm, eyes half open but seeing nothing. A thin strand of saliva connected his lower lip to the canvas. His limbs were arranged in the awkward geometry of sudden unconsciousness, one arm bent beneath him, one leg twisted at an uncomfortable angle. Nobody moved. Bruce released the wrist he'd been holding and stepped back. His breathing was unchanged, his shirt barely disturbed. He looked down at the unconscious seal with an expression that revealed nothing. Not triumph, not contempt, not even particular interest. He might have been observing a mechanical problem that had been solved. Lieutenant Commander Harmon was the first to break the paralysis. He rushed forward, dropping to one knee beside Dalton, checking pulse, pupils, neck alignment. "He's breathing," Harmon announced, relief clear in his voice. "Someone get the medic." One of the trainees sprinted toward the door. Bruce walked to the edge of the mat and grabbed his towel. He wiped his hands slowly, methodically, like he was cleaning up after routine exercise rather than a physical confrontation. The guys around him kept their distance, watching him with a blend of awe and something approaching fear. A young petty officer, barely 22, fresh from basic underwater demolition training, found the courage to speak. "What did you do to him, at the end?" Bruce folded the towel and placed it over his shoulder. "I helped him sleep." "But how?" "The body has many switches," Bruce said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Most people don't know where they are. Fewer know how to use them." Dalton groaned. His eyelids fluttered. Harmon kept a hand on his chest, stopping him from rising too fast. "Easy, Ray. Take it slow." Dalton's eyes opened fully, and for several seconds they held the confusion of a man waking in an unfamiliar place. Then memory returned. His gaze swept the room until it found Bruce, and something complicated passed across his face. Humiliation, certainly, but also recognition. The recognition of a man who'd just encountered a reality he could no longer deny. He tried to sit up. Harmon helped him, supporting his back. "What happened?" Dalton's voice was hoarse, cracked. "You lost," Harmon said simply. Dalton processed this. His jaw tightened, hands clenched into fists against the mat. For a moment it seemed like he might try to continue, might try to salvage something from the wreckage of his pride. Then his shoulders dropped. "How long was I out?" "Maybe 15 seconds. Dalton nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on Bruce. The hostility had drained from his expression, replaced by something more complex. He looked like a man whose map of the world had just been revealed as fundamentally incomplete. "I've fought a lot of men," Dalton said quietly. "Hand to hand, for real. Not training, not sparring, for real." He paused, searching for words. "I've never. I couldn't even touch you." Bruce walked toward him. The guys between them parted instinctively, creating a corridor of empty space. He stopped a few feet from Dalton and looked down at him for a long moment. Neither man spoke. "You're strong," Bruce finally said. "You're well-trained. You have experience most men will never have." His voice carried no judgment, no superiority. "Just assessment." "But you fought with your body. You didn't fight with this." He tapped his own temple. Dalton frowned. "What do you mean?" "You decided who I was before we started. You decided what I could do. You decided what you needed to do to beat me." Bruce crouched down, bringing himself eye level with the seated seal. "You fought the man you expected, not the man standing in front of you." Dalton absorbed this in silence. Fighting isn't about size, not about strength, not even about speed, though speed helps. Bruce's eyes held Dalton's with an intensity that seemed to bypass language entirely. "Fighting is about truth. The man who sees reality more clearly will always defeat the man who sees only what he wants to see. And you saw me clearly. I saw a man who needed to prove something. A man who couldn't afford to lose. A man whose ego had become his blindfold. Bruce paused. That man was already defeated before he threw his first punch. Dalton's jaw worked. His eyes glistened not with tears, but with the moisture of someone confronting something they'd long avoided. I've built my whole career on being the hardest man in the room, he said, voice barely above a whisper. If I'm not that, what am I? Bruce stood up. He extended his hand. A man who just learned something most people never learn. He waited until Dalton took his hand, then pulled him to his feet with surprising ease. That's not weakness. That's the beginning of real strength. The medic arrived to find Dalton standing on his own, though unsteadily. He insisted on refusing treatment, a final gesture of pride nobody in the room challenged. The young corpsman checked his pupils anyway, asked him a few standard questions about his name and the date, and declared him likely concussed but stable. The training session was officially over. The other guys began dispersing, gathering gear, speaking in hushed voices, but nobody left right away. There was an unspoken understanding that something significant had occurred, something that needed processing before it could be filed away as memory. Bruce retrieved a small canvas bag from the corner and began packing his stuff. His movements were unhurried, precise. A few of the trainees watched him with the cautious fascination of people observing a creature they didn't fully understand. Lieutenant Commander Harmon approached, keeping his voice low. I should apologize for what happened. Dalton stepped out of line. This was supposed to be a professional exchange. Bruce zipped his bag closed. He did what he needed to do. That's generous of you. It's not generosity. Bruce turned to face Harmon. A man like that carries his doubt like a stone in his chest. He needed to drop it somewhere. Today he dropped it here. Harmon considered this. You think he learned something? I think he has the opportunity to learn something. Whether he takes it depends on whether he can let go of who he thought he was. Bruce shouldered his bag. That's the hardest fight any man will ever face. Harder than anything that happens on a mat. Across the room, Dalton sat on a bench against the wall, elbows resting on his knees, head hanging forward, eyes fixed on the floor between his feet. He looked diminished somehow, not physically, but in some less tangible way. The aura of invincibility he'd carried into the room had evaporated, leaving behind something more human, more uncertain. One of the younger SEALs sat down beside him, offering a bottle of water. Dalton took it without looking up, drank mechanically, said nothing. Bruce watched this for a moment, then he crossed the room. The guys nearby tensed slightly as he approached Dalton, unsure what to expect. But Bruce simply stopped a few feet away and waited until Dalton raised his head. You hit hard, Bruce said. Your structure is good. Your instincts are genuine. He paused. But you telegraph with your shoulders. You drop your right hand after you jab. And when you're frustrated, you commit too fully to your attacks. Dalton stared at him. You're giving me advice. I'm telling you what I saw. Why? Bruce was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, something more personal, more exposed. Because 15 years ago I was you. Dalton's expression shifted. The defensive tension in his face softened, replaced by genuine curiosity. I was the young man who needed to prove himself, Bruce continued, who measured his worth by how many opponents he could defeat, who believed that being unbeatable was the same as being complete. He shook his head slowly. It took me a long time to understand that fighting isn't the destination, it's the vehicle. The vehicle to what? To knowing yourself, to facing your fears, to understanding that the greatest opponent you'll ever encounter isn't some other man. It's the voice in your own head that tells you lies about who you are and what you're capable of. Dalton absorbed this in silence. The young SEAL sitting beside him looked between the two men, aware he was witnessing something he'd probably never see again. I've been doing this for 12 years, Dalton finally said. Combat diving, demolition, direct action missions. I've seen men die. I've killed men. His voice cracked slightly. And in 90 seconds, you made me feel like I don't know anything. You know many things, Bruce said. But you don't know yourself. Not yet. How do I start? Bruce reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook worn, its cover creased from years of handling. He tore out a page, produced a pen, and wrote something on it. "This is where I train when I'm in Los Angeles," he said, handing the paper to Dalton. "If you're ever there, come find me. Not to fight, to learn." Dalton looked at the paper, then back at Bruce. "You'd do that? After what I said? After what I tried to do?" "What you said came from fear. What you tried to do came from doubt." Bruce zipped his bag closed again. "Those aren't crimes. They're symptoms of a man who hasn't found his center yet." He extended his hand. Dalton took it this time not as an adversary accepting defeat, but as something closer to a student acknowledging a teacher. "My name's Ray," Dalton said. "I don't think I ever actually introduced myself." Bruce smiled, the first genuine smile he'd shown since arriving. "I know who you are, Ray. The question is whether you know." He turned and walked toward the door. The room parted before him once again, though the quality of the difference had changed. It was no longer wariness, it was respect. At the threshold, Bruce paused and looked back. "Remember what I said, the body can be trained in months, the mind takes a lifetime. But the man who masters his mind will never be defeated, not by any opponent, not by any circumstance, not by life itself." Then he was gone. The door closed behind Bruce Lee, and the room sank into heavy silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The mat still bore the scuff marks of confrontation. Ray Dalton sat motionless on the bench, staring at the paper in his hand. The address was written in clean, efficient strokes. No flourishes, no wasted ink. Lieutenant Commander Harmon sat beside him. "How are you feeling?" Dalton didn't answer immediately. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in his pocket. "I've been under fire," he finally said. "Felt bullets pass close enough to sense the heat. Watched friends bleed out." He paused. "None of that shook me like what just happened." "He scared you?" "Not him. Not what he did to me." He touched his chest. "What shook me was realizing that everything I thought I knew was wrong. Every fight I've won, every man I've beaten. I was playing a different game, a smaller game, and I didn't even know it." 6 months later, Dalton appeared at Bruce's training space in Los Angeles. He'd called ahead. Bruce answered simply, "Come." He expected a gym. What he found was humbler mirrors on one wall, a wooden dummy in the corner, mats covering concrete. That evening they trained together, not fighting, but exploring. Bruce showed principles rather than techniques, concepts rather than combinations. At the session's end, Dalton asked the question that had haunted him since that day in San Diego. "Were you ever in danger?" Bruce considered this seriously. Danger exists in every fight. The man who believes himself invulnerable has already lost. He paused. "But was I worried? No. Why not? Because I knew you before you threw your first punch. Your assumptions, your patterns, your ego." Bruce met his eyes. "You were fighting me. I was fighting the truth of the situation. The truth always wins." Years later, after Bruce Lee's death shocked the world, Dalton would remember him differently than the public did. Not the movie star, not the icon. He'd remember a quiet evening in a converted garage, and a voice saying, "The truth always wins." It was the most important lesson he ever learned.